Welcome to this episode of Coach Etch Tips. Today, we're going to talk about leadership, about empowerment, about building a culture, bringing people together, teamwork, showing them what a leader looks like, how to relate to people, and also how to self-reflect on yourself as a teacher. You're going to hear from a good friend of mine, Steve Stickney. Steve is currently a music professor at Mount Mercy College in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, but Steve has a 38-year career as a music educator in some of the biggest high schools in the state of Iowa. He's traveled the country as a clinician. He's been in high demand and has been extremely successful. But the biggest part of Steve's career, if you check him out, is the relationships that he's built at all levels and how committed people have been to him and really kind of become part of his family. I think you really enjoy hearing Steve talk today. He's going to share some with you about self-reflection, how he really grew as from standpoint of being a young teacher early in his career to really self-reflect on himself, then to connect with mentors. He's wanted to find out what successful people do. And he got connected to some top people in his field in the state that he was teaching in. And he followed what they did and he'd talk to them and bounce ideas off of them. He'd go to clinics. He'll share how he had to go out and grow himself outside, whether it's at clinics, listen to clinicians, reading books, watching videos to grow and develop as a professional in his field. Then at the end, he's going to talk about leadership. He's going to talk about what a leader looks like and how he taught his students this, how he developed culture within his programs, with the community, with the parents, and connected. I think you're going to really love this episode. So with that, I'm ready to move on. And the next thing you know, we got Steve coming up here. Thanks. Oh, and by the way, if you like what you hear, please give us a thumbs up or even subscribe. Really appreciate that. And I'm going to have some opportunities just to ask you to maybe comment in the comment sections if you want to add, because it kind of helps this whole community grow in a mastermind with us sharing ideas and really get an interaction going. So any help, anything you can add to the cause, we'd really appreciate it. Remember, thumbs up if you like what you hear. Have a good one. All right, folks, welcome to this episode of Coach Etch Tips. Today here, I am so pumped up, as I said in the preview here, got one of my old friends from growing up, lived in the neighborhood just a few houses apart. And Steve was really involved in music. I was involved in athletics, but our paths really started to come together after my sophomore year in high school. We both got in this group called Happiness Incorporated. And we were in concert choir together. And I was so fortunate to let music and the vocal music industry touch my life, because it's one of the greatest experiences of my life. But that's where Steve and I really got to grow a friendship with a group of guys who are pretty close knit. We even went to senior prom together. I was thinking of bringing that picture up, Steve. We all looked a little younger and a little less gray hair, standing around that Corvette. I remember cruising down to the lake one day with you, not following the speed limit.
We were a couple of knuckleheads back there. Thank goodness we learned a couple things along the way.
But it's great to reconnect with a buddy, but some of you people, especially if you're involved in the music area and teaching, Steve is one of the foremost band directors, musician teachers in the high school level in the country today. And I want to introduce you to Steve Stickney here, and is teaching in college right now. But Steve, share with us a little bit about your background, where you've been, and what kind of brought you into this profession.
Yeah, well, thanks, Jeff. It's great to be with you. Well, my background is from high school. I love music, and that was kind of my primary activity as a trumpet player. And of course, we both, our paths crossed and became friends through our choir experience together. And so that initially led me to decide on a career in teaching, continuing to do something that I was passionate about, playing, and to be able to share that with my students. I had a 33-year high school band career, started small high school west of Iowa City, Williamsburg, had a band of about 35 students. And from there, Muscatine High School a couple years, Iowa City High in Iowa City for 16 before ending my career at Linmar in Marion, Iowa. And when I left that program, we had probably around 340 students in the band program, 4 concert bands, 4 jazz bands, and went to a volunteer marching band before school, which is right now, I think when I left is about 220 students, and I think they're up to about 260 now. All these students doing something they don't have to do before school. And so that through that experience, and what I think, we're going to talk a little bit more later about, developing leadership. And in my case, kind of what I've learned over the course of my career through trial and error, to get to where I am now, where I have an opportunity through my job. This is my 5th year now, director of bands at Mount Mercy University. And although we don't have a marching band, I do go out and do a lot of clinics and work with a lot of high school bands and their student leadership teams in kind of developing that group and setting goals and identifying what that actually means to be a leader, and how powerful it is kind of within your program. I think any young teacher, old, whatever, wherever you're at in your program, early on for me, is trying to see the forest through the trees. You're just trying to survive, aren't you? Day to day. And kind of just, there's just so much you have to learn and to be successful at it. And I sure depended a lot on my fellow master teachers, older teachers, picking their brain, watching them work, and to what worked for them and why, going to a lot of clinics and workshops, and then just personal trial and error. And I think probably the biggest thing and the most important thing for anybody in any profession is to really be honest with yourself in assessing, when something goes right or goes wrong, what are the reasons for that? Why did this happen? And being willing to look at what part of that is your responsibility and what you can do different in the future to change that outcome. We all know people that struggle with that, and they have the same thing keeps happening over and over again, whether it's professionally or in their personal relationships. And it's, woe is me, why does this keep happening to me? Well, perhaps you need to look inward and take ownership with that. So I've always tried to do that. And I think any master teacher, I think that's really important in trying to turn weaknesses into strengths. So in terms of leadership, I've made all the mistakes, as I'm sure Jeff,
It's a great tool. Learn from your mistakes.
That's what it's all about. And some of it just has to come through trial and error and through your experiences. And then kind of also, I think part of that as I've gotten older, in whatever job I've taken, trying to understand the culture within that community and within that school. There are certain drills that you might be important to do with your basketball team, but if they're not at a certain skill level, they're not going to be as effective. So, I think that's really important, and then developing kind of the strategies with how to get them to whatever your goal is. To me, I think of it kind of as an equation, and that is, there's your teacher or your coach. You and I think most of us are going to do our very best, to be organized, to have a plan in place for your students to be successful, your athletes, your band members, whatever it might be. So that's kind of a given. Plus, you're going to have a certain, whatever that talent level might be. That's going to be a given. But then there's an X factor, I think, that goes into whatever success, whatever you might describe that is, in terms of your team or your group reaching their potential.
But let's as we get into some of that, one thing I'd just like to just take a brief minute, and I I know I remember in college coming down the road, seeing you up there in the jazz band, cranking away at Carver Arena for the Hawkeyes. You're a great trumpet player, and you remind me of Doc Severinsen back then when you crank and do it. But was there a point, and I'm not sure, did you decide going into college? I knew you want to pursue music. Were you deciding to become an education major and teacher right away, or did that transpire in college? You kind of, what was that moment where you found out you had
Yeah.
that passion to be a teacher, to say, you know what, I love performing, but I really want to go teach kids the beauty of music and how to play an instrument and all that. When did that click for you, and what kind of drove you to do that?
Yeah, that's a good question. We both graduated in the late 70s, and it was a lot different than it is now in terms of visiting lots of schools and kind of, to be honest with you, Jeff, I didn't really put in a lot of thought to all of that. I went to a music camp a couple of years at Iowa. So I was familiar with the University of Iowa, and trumpet was what I worked on the most, and what I was most, I had the most success at. So I decided, well, I'll just go to Iowa and try music. I really didn't think about the education part, other than for me personally, I always knew that I was never going to be at a professional level to make a living at it. Well, how do I make a living? Okay, well, education. So I took those classes, and it didn't really click for me until one summer through a friend, I went and I decided to be a summer camp counselor in Colorado at a wilderness camp,
Okay.
and just spend a summer kind of working with kids. And it was kind of through that experience. And it was one of those, it was right on the Colorado River, and kids came from all over the country and actually all over the world. And we had a 6-week and a 5-week session. So you get to know these kids pretty well.
Mhm.
And it was really powerful through that experience to see how they matured and how we grew as a group, and cared about each other, and learned to work together, and just kind of the impact that I was able to have, leading them as their counselor, as an example, and just kind of the expectations that I had. And so, I've kind of, over the course of my career, I mean, I love music, and I love sharing my passion for music, but my goal has never been to turn all of my students into music majors and teachers. Um, it's kind of been using music as a way to teach students how to be successful,
Yep.
using the discipline of music to do that. And through that, and and more specifically through marching band, which we had a strong student leadership component, teaching them the skills to be successful, what it takes to be a successful leader, and just a successful person. So that's kind of been the most satisfying part of my career, is just using music as a vehicle to teach students how to be successful, and how to work together, learning how to collaborate, how to communicate, and how to work through differences, and do it in a respectful way.
Yeah, let's dig into that, the relationship part, because I know we talked a little bit beforehand about, as you develop that culture and those leaders, you first have got to attract those students and you've got to connect with them. And I know you said you had to go out and find other things because you really didn't get that in your professional development within a school. So, what are some of the sources, resources you went to, and then how did you start that when you came into that community? Is there certain things you did to kind of figure out the culture, and how did you first reach out to students to bring them into band, to grow a band from 30 to 300? I mean, you got to create relationships to do that. What are some of the little technical skills, that are things that you had to use to do that?
Well, I think it's really important to early on to try and learn as much as you can about the situation that you are going into. Wherever I went, before I ever had my first rehearsal or a practice or whatever that might be, I always would invite all of the upperclassmen in that program, all the students to a meeting to meet with me. And I would just pick their brains to try and learn as much as I could about kind of where the program was, what was working, what was not working, and kind of where their heads were at, because that would allow me to kind of figure out the best strategy going in and moving forward to make sure that I was preparing to meet them where they were. And I think a lot of teachers and coaches and band directors, they struggle with this piece. If they don't know that and something worked maybe in their experience, and they try to implement that in a situation that does not have that kind of tradition, they can fall flat on their face very quickly and lose their students and the parental support, if you're not there. That again I've done that every place I've gone to, and that's been really helpful. And also I think it's really important to try and develop those personal relationships with your students beyond being their director or their coach, and knowing, and that's going to allow you to know how to motivate them, to know what makes them tick. And some kids, Jeff, and I've known directors like this where it's my way or the highway, that top down, you just listen and do what I tell you. Or, and I was this way as a young director, when things didn't go well, I was very good. I didn't have the tools. I didn't have the tools in my little professional toolbox. I was pretty good with a hammer,
Yeah.
coming down on them.
Yeah.
But maybe the situation just needed a little sandpaper, a little massage, and every athlete or every student responds differently. So how do you develop those relationships with your students? And I found that to be really beneficial, is to kind of trying to know your parental support group and getting to know your students and where they're at, because that's going to then allow me to figure out how best to move forward with the group and with certain students individually.
Now, on an individual basis, you talk about that component of outside of just being their band director, their instrument teacher, to get to know them, what makes them tick. Is there anything that you did intentional in ways of trying to find out about that student? Did you have a one-on-one meeting? Did you have them fill out a sheet of paper? Or I can tell you, very open and observant.
Yeah.
Sometimes a new young teacher needs to, I want to know, okay, how did you do that? What is something you did intentional, or were you just you? And that's great for you, but it can't all just be you.
Yeah, well, I would always, and I'll use marching band as an example, but it could be for any athletic team, or, and taking time in the classroom to do this. But I would always, before we would have any kind of rehearsal, before any marching band season, I would always meet with a leadership team that was selected through an interview process. And as you know, Jeff, your strongest leaders are not necessarily your top athlete,
yeah,
or your top musician. And so I think it's really important and in a situation where you have a smaller team, you can have everybody on a basketball team involved in this. But maybe you don't. Maybe you just have your upperclassmen as a leadership team. But I would select those students that would have responsibilities with working with their sections. And we would talk very specifically about looking back to last year, what are some things collectively? Well, first of all, what are some things that individually that you did that helped create success for us. Let's identify those. Let's write them down. And we would create lists of characteristics, things that individually people, and I'd have them write it down too. Um, what they did that added to the success of the team. Also, what are some things that they didn't do that they would like to do better individually? And then we would also talk as a team. What did we do as a program that helped us reach our whatever our goals were? What are things that we want to continue? What are things that we want to build on? And then what are some things that we want to do better? What's not working? What are the rough edges of our program? And that to me was what I always worked to do. I always worked to try and rub out all the rough edges that created friction within our program, that maybe caused students to drop out or that were a frustration.
But cool about that,
And
just like to jump in here, Steve. So the people viewing, like I said, that little intentional thing you do, whether it's within a band program, an athletic team, or even a seventh grade social studies classroom, those reflection things are the type of things people can do with an individual as a collectively, say monthly, because you have that, even that little classroom of 25, 30 people have that same, they have their leaders in the classroom, how they come together, they become a unit, kind of a family for a year in that class or semester. And if any of you watching has some little great techniques that you use, be sure and add those into the comment subjects down there. I think that would be great to really kind of grow this mastermind, this discussion, and help out others watching. I love the detail of that because that's something that any teacher can take and start to do laid out that way. And thank you. So go ahead and kind of continue with steps beyond that you took to grow that leadership and that culture within your program and environment.
Yeah, so that's a good discussion. And early on, when I would do this with students, you think that they know, but to really have them articulate that is sometimes more difficult than you would think.
I
So
found a lot of people have never asked a student or a child to articulate that. They just kind of go through school and tell you, okay, do this, do this, do this, but you never get a chance to hear that back and either that self-reflection or what's important to you or what did you do well? What do you think you could do better? I mean, that's just kind of one of those moments where I go, really, how come nobody ever asked that?
It's kind of a duh, but yeah, you're absolutely right. And I didn't do it early on. I was one of those, well, this is the way we're going to do it. Kind of like I said, being the hammer.
Yeah.
And, I like to think of being a farmer, kind of an analogy to what we do in kind of creating through what we're talking about is kind of like you have to cultivate your field. You have to first clear rocks, you have to pull weeds, you have to fertilize in order to get things to grow organically. And it's through these sorts of conversations that you can really empower students to feel like they are part of the program, that they
guiding the discussion and you're kind of creating a collective vision rather than being the leader who says, okay, here's what you're going to do and you're going to go there. Your leader says, hey, let's talk about this together. Yeah, doesn't that sound great? Now let's go do this together. That'll be awesome for everybody.
Right.
Best type of leader, the person that shares that collective vision and says, hey, I want to go do this with you. Let's do this together rather than you need to go do that.
Well, and valuing that feedback. And it also gives you a true insight as to where they're at. And it's like, okay, well, we really need to work on this. I really need to do a better job of this if we're going to reach whatever our goals are, in terms of kind of where their heads are at.
Yeah, all that in life, not just the students, the teachers, the administrators, whatever job you do, you got to kind of plan to review all the time.
Yep. So it's that constant kind of self-reflection after every practice, and then it kind of has you have that kind of common knowledge to come back to when things don't go well. Hey guys, remember what we talked about here? We're kind of sliding this direction. It's just a good way to kind of have you have that document that you all are kind of um, are creating together. And I just think it's so important, especially for those younger students that maybe don't have the skills. Maybe they're not starting on the basketball program, but you've got to keep them. You want them to feel a part of it,
Yeah.
and like they have ownership in what's going on, and creating ways to show to let them have a leadership opportunity. Um, because over the years, Jeff, I've seen so many times, and I'm sure you have, you can't develop potential of students that are not with you,
Yeah.
that choose that exit. And how many times have I've had kids, it's maybe in year 3 or 4 of your program that all of a sudden the light bulb comes on, or they end up being a strong contributor to your team. But you want to keep them. You don't want to just focus on those kids with the most talent. I mean, we all need those good little soldiers. So this is about kind of developing that kind of, that type of ownership within your program. So we would talk about the program, pluses and minuses, and kind of talk about ways in which we want to try to improve upon those weaknesses. And then I would dive in also more specifically about what are characteristics of a leader? What makes a good leader? And I kind of like thinking in terms of a servant leader. Somebody that a leader that serves others, that you lift others up and support others through your actions. And so, exactly what does that mean? And some of it, and so we would create a list like that, and a lot of things are pretty basic, but yet a lot of people struggle with, being on time, having all your materials, being ready to work when it's time. Being that kind of example. You don't have to be a good leader and be really vocal, leading by example. What kind of example does it set when my top musician is late to rehearsal every day to those younger players? That's really powerful.
One of the common threads I've heard from doing these interviews with people is that sometimes it is teachers, as educators, directors, coaches, we can assume that the children we're working with have had similar experiences. And really, where we're at in life today is the sum total of the experiences and the people we've met. Now, if they've never had that experience of seeing or hearing what good leadership looks like, how can we expect them to display it? An old saying, you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And so when you allow them that sometimes you can't assume that these children you're working with all know what you know and have expectations for them to live up to it. And then the second thing is this common thread in leadership is really, I think, when the teachers, whether it's in the classroom or the group you lead, once it becomes more about them than you, the leader that's about me and you need to all know I'm the boss is not the most effective one. But when the people start realizing it's about them and you're helping to guide them, like you talk, bring the group together, that's all of a sudden when the leadership really becomes powerful. Even if you've got that student in your classroom or in your band or in your team that realizes I'm here to help serve the other people here too, to play my role in whatever the setting may be. It might be just for that 50-minute class to work right, or it might be for that marching band on Friday night, the football game to all be in step, or whatever it may be. It's knowing your role and playing it and giving of yourself and being a servant. I love you bringing that up. And if how you develop that, and people watching again, if you've got ways you develop leadership either in your 7th grade social studies class, your sophomore soccer team, or your choir or band, share those comments with us. That's great for us because that's such a key thing in education. Because once you get that buy-in and people come together, wow, it really gets fun then for everybody.
Well, it does. And it's, this is true professionally as a coach, as a band director, or in your personal life, if you only take, demand, do it this way, this way, this way, eventually you're going to be bankrupt with those students. If you're just yelling at them, or if you're not investing in them, um, you're going to be bankrupt in those relationships.
Yeah.
You need to provide those positive assets in your interactions with your students. They need to know that you care about them, that you respect them, that you respect what they have to say and what they have to offer, and that you honor them as a person. If they don't feel that, then they're not going to stick it out unless, especially those ones that are not maybe playing. You may have, depending on the situation, but I had a former colleague that put it that way, and it just made so much sense that in our lives, we have to give, we have to listen to people, we have to honor them, we have to build up those personal assets. And then at those times when you really need to make a withdrawal, at the right moment, when you have to really get on them because for whatever reason, you've got money in the bank. I just think that's really important. And so there's lots of ways to do that. If you have a problem, let's say you have your top athlete that's just going through the motions or just really giving you an attitude, there's just something going on that isn't right. And maybe the interactions with their other teammates, how do you deal with that?
Yeah. Because
that is like a cancer or a virus that can spread quickly through the whole team. Yeah. If you have somebody that people look up to, maybe because of their athletic or their musical ability, that doesn't mean that they're a good leader just because they're a good athlete or a good musician. And that I've really worked, and that's what those rough edges where you kind of work to rub out is that negative energy that can really spread quickly. And then you've got a problem. So how do you do that? How do you deal with that? Do you just in front of your team or in front of whatever the group, do you just come down on them for that?
Every situation is different. That's the one thing is, as I collectively got more experiences, I had a larger database to draw from because as you said earlier, the kids are all kind of different, come from different places. And I've had certain athletes that are students in a classroom you need to pull to the side because if you call them out in front of everybody, it's not going to go good. Then I've had students or athletes that, you know what, you can do that. But again, that takes time to be open, paying attention to listening, especially I finished up my career as a middle school physical education teacher. And there's nothing crazier than a 7th and 8th grade physical education class. And quite often, the showmen, the people that really want to put a show on stand out in a class at that age. But when you bring them over and talk to them at a young age and say, hey, you know what? You've got leadership ability. You can lead this class in the wrong way or the right way. I had a fellow teacher talk about, all classrooms have culture. Is it a good culture or a bad culture? And quite often, if you get kids if you open to them and ask them to help you, hey, I need your help and assistance. And I really believe you can do this if you want. Because then your classmates will look at you better. All of a sudden they're attracted to you because of what you're doing for them, as opposed to getting bugged by the stuff you're doing around everybody.
Yeah.
So it's just everything's a little bit different. And you've kind of talked about being observant talking, I think is an important thing to do no matter where you're at, because it can change the environment and the culture that you have if you don't get that buy-in. And it's one of the big reasons I've done this is because you don't know what you don't know. You and I got 38, 39 years of experience, but the person in the third year, they've only got a certain amount of experience, but they can learn from those older mentors and people and stuff to expand their experience level by hearing stories of others, which you and I both did over our career.
Well, and early on, it was all about trying to get a handle on the discipline, trying to figure that out. And as later in our careers, it was never, for me, I never had discipline problems. I had kids
Quite
that
sure.
I
It
had
would be
kids
that.
that I had to, have conversations with to help them grow and help them learn. I think if we can just make sure that our students always know that we care about them, that we value them, we may not be happy about a behavior,
Yes.
but we always care about them. If they think that we don't like them, that it's personal. I mean, it should never be personal, because then once you can get past that, there's still that feeling of respect and that you care about them. So I think that's an important piece, and that I really feel it is important to if there are issues, like you said, some you can, if you know really well and you've developed that relationship, you can get on them in front of other people and they get it. But if you don't know them very well, I think, boy, pulling them aside and just having those personal conversations is really important. What's going on here? This is what I'm observing. Talk to me. Is it something I'm doing? And maybe they're interpreting something you're doing incorrectly. Or maybe through that conversation, you realize, oh, I've got to back off here. I've got to deal with this person a little bit differently because of kind of how they're interpreting things. And so you can have that conversation. And then sometimes maybe something's going on in their life that's completely unrelated to what you're doing. I mean, the number of times I put my foot in my mouth, I've I've gotten on somebody and then come to find out they're having a crisis at home, something completely unrelated that's impacting them at school. And so knowing that, of course, completely changes how you're going to move forward with them and to honor them. And then I think that's an opportunity to strengthen those relationships. And those are all really valuable, teachable moments with these students or athletes.
That point of impact, and we could probably talk all day here, but I want to kind of wrap this up. But I know over your career, and impact is my word for the year here. I had a lot of discussions last month with some friends, and the word of impact, having an impact. I think that's what gives us satisfaction as teachers. But sometimes as a young teacher, you don't always know the impact you're going to have down the road if you're teaching that sixth, seventh, eighth grader. And I'm sure a couple things I'd like to just wrapping up. Was there that person, teacher, director, or somebody on the road that was one, if you could identify just one person that really impacted you in your life? And have you stayed in touch with them? And then what's some of the feedback? I mean, to help these younger teachers through, trust me, you're going to have people, because I'm sure not everybody that was ever in a band or in your classroom has gone on to be, performing artists and instruments. They've gone on to be other things. And it was those things outside of music that you helped develop that have come back, maybe a story too that said, hey, Mr. Stickney, thanks, man. You impacted me 15, 20 years ago because you've been around enough to say that. So kind of wrap up with a little bit of that to give those people listen here, hopefully a feel good feeling. And maybe if somebody's having a tough day, this will help pull them through and realize that this is coming someday.
Yeah. Well, for me, I've just been blessed. I've had a lot of really powerful mentors in my life that have kind of helped me along the way. Um, Probably my junior high band director. Um, he was a real taskmaster and a real old school exterior, but you know, just such a warm heart. And he really inspired me to work. And I really, I think of him often as somebody that really got me turned around and on a path to where I'm at today. Um, but and then the second for me has been being a part of what's called the Iowa Bandmasters Association, and being a part of that, and just kind of what I've learned through my friendships and being involved with that organization and the mentors I've had through that. Um, but it's just been a wonderful journey in that way. In terms of impact, I think this is a good story. That's a good example of you never know what small little thing you might say or do that can completely change the direction of one's life. I think as educators, we kind of forget that. because it's just part of our job interacting with students every day. But just a simple hello, um, just how powerful that can be. And this story is when I was in Iowa City early on. I taught both high school and I taught at one of the elementary schools. So I started this young lady on flute. I taught her in fifth and sixth grade. And then she went to junior high for seventh and eighth grade. And she was such a fine flute player that the band director said, "Hey, why don't you play oboe? Because I need an oboe and you're such a good flute player." And so she ended up playing oboe and did great. And then I looked over my registration for incoming ninth graders to the high school, and she wasn't on it. And of course, I taught her for 2 years. So I got on the phone. I called this young lady up and said, "Hey, I see that you're not signed up for band. You know, what's going on? You're such a good oboe player." And she said, "I just never really liked the oboe. So I'm going to just explore other things in high school." So I just said, "Well, I don't care if you play oboe. I just want you to be involved in band. You can go back to flute if you want. I just, you're such a great young lady and musician." So she did. She went back to flute. She joined the band, and she's now the flute professor at Auburn University.
Ah,
So you just never know. That one little phone call that I didn't think anything of, I just would do that to kids that I thought should continue with the program. I just reach out to them, and so I guess that's a nice example of just be aware of what you say and how it can impact your students.
hey, you could have never picked up the phone. I mean, that's just a start right there.
Yeah.
Just wondering, where are you, and just allowing somebody to have the opportunity to pursue their passion, to kind of end up with their purpose and to go where they went. So that is so cool. And Steve, we could talk all day. This has been such a pleasure. And folks here watching today, I hope you've gotten as much as I have out of this. If you've got that a person that made a difference in your life or a story that can kind of keep people going, be sure and put that in the comments here. And again, if you like what you heard today, please subscribe and share this with others, be friends of yours that you think could benefit. We've got many other interviews going on here at Coach Etch Tips, and we're just here to help teachers grow and to make it a better experience and make a difference in the kids of all of our lives. So, Steve, I want to thank you so much for coming on here, and looking forward maybe in a few months, come back and do this one again.
Well, let's do it, Jeff. And I just want to say thank you for what you're doing. And you are demonstrating leadership right now through continuing to grow and try to impact people, teachers, and putting yourself out there. And that's what it's all about, is being uncomfortable with and growing through our new experiences. So kudos to you, buddy.
Thank you so much, man. Appreciate it. Wow, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. I really learned a lot, and it was great for me connecting with an old friend who I knew many years ago, but our paths is kind of separated on our own professional careers. I hope you really gained some value out of what Steve had to offer today, and be sure if you did, give us a thumbs up on this episode today. But to recap, I'd just like to touch on a few things that I thought Steve brought out just kind of from the beginning to the end. Is we've all been there as a young teacher. And he talked about how important it was to do self-assessment with yourself and really be honest about what worked and what didn't. Why did it happen? Be willing to look at what you can do better to change outcomes. And most importantly, be honest and take ownership of yourself and really what you're doing in your career. He shared some great stories with us about how he developed programs, connected with people. One of the things he did when he went into a new program was to really kind of find out the culture of that community, of that school, of those kids before he came in and just decided, okay, it's my way or the highway. He wasn't that type of person. He really wanted to be a servant leader, and he wanted to connect with the community to find out what they're all about. And then he came up with a plan and identified areas where he thought he could help them grow and develop more and more. He created a list of things for different groups to do that they could help to improve on. He'd bring in his leadership within his group and talk to the older students, the seniors that have been in his band program, and help get them connected with the younger students in their programs. I know maybe you're an elementary or middle school classroom teacher, and you go, well, what does that mean to me? Well, one thing I know I did is find a way to connect. You find those leaders in your classroom. And it doesn't necessarily mean it's the smartest student, the best behaved student or what, but is to enlist them, give them some empowerment to help you in the classroom to build that positive culture. Like I said earlier, classrooms have a culture. They're not always good. They might be bad. But that student, lots of times, that leader in your classroom, you identify them, they can either help your classroom get better or they can help it to be challenged and be struggling. So enlist their assistance in it. Let them know you believe in them and that they can make a difference for all the students around them. I really believe most students really want to feel good about helping others if you really give them the chance. And as I said earlier, you don't know what you don't know. Just gonna kind of sum up what he had to say today, talking about self-reflection, leadership, communication, empowerment, ownership. And one of the really important things that's been consistent through all these interviews is to listen to them, build up their personal assets, give students a voice, hear what they have to say, let them feel empowered to be part of the process together. It's really the best way to take off and lead. And he talked about sharing with the kids what the characteristics of a good leader is, because sometimes, depending on your age group, especially if you're working with early teens, adolescents, they might not even know what a leader is or what it should look like. What makes a good leader? What makes a bad leader? And he also talked about emphasizing servant leadership, being there for others. Lastly, he closed with saying, you just never know what you can say or do that can completely change the directions of one's life. And that's been another consistent thing with so many people I've talked with, is that pay attention to every little detail. You never know what kind of day they're having. Sometimes you just assume they know how to behave and should behave right for you because you're the teacher. But you might find out they've had a terrible day or something terrible happened in their family. So be in tune and continue to always make that difference. And remember, if you like what you heard here, a key point, please mention something, down in the comments, give us a thumbs up. Feel free to subscribe if you'd like to. And we really want to thank you for joining us here on Coach Etch Tips. And we hope to see you on another episode coming soon. Take care. Have a great day. Dreams, passion, and purpose. We really believe in that. So go out there and find your dreams, pursue your passions, and live your purpose.